Hello and welcome to the Latina Homesteader with your host, Olga Maria. Today's episode, I'm joined by John Klar. He is a Vermont author and food rights activist, an attorney, and he raises grass fed beef and lamb in Brookfield, Vermont. John's 2023 book is titled Small Farm Republic: Why Conservatives Must Embrace Local Agriculture, Reject Climate Alarmism, and Lead an Environmental Revival. Welcome, John.
Thanks so much for having me.
So,
Having fun already.
thank you. So, for our purposes here, I wanted to really focus on the farming aspect, the homesteading aspect. So, were you raised on a farm, or how did you get into it?
Well, yes and no. Very much no. But I was raised around farms. My mother was raised on a declining dairy farm. My grandfather, when the bulk tanks came in, stopped milking. Up until then, it milked by hand. That farm had before that, like many Vermont farms, been a sheep farm. And when the wool market declined, Vermonters moved into dairy, eventually raw milk when the transportation system was available to ship it to Boston. And so, but I was raised with a lot of great aunts and uncles who were still milking cows and did right up until in their 80s. And so I was sort of raised in the Vermont culture, but my mom had moved to Connecticut just before I was born. So I'm a flatlander by birth. So I always had a foot sort of in the city and a foot in the remote country. In fact, I should say, few people understand just how bizarre it was in 1970 or 75 to drive to Vermont. There was no 91 or 89. It took 6 or 7 hours, and you were really in the middle of nowhere, and you saw no Connecticut plates, and nobody in Connecticut knew really that Vermont existed. Or if they did, it was a ski
So, what was
chalet.
it? Just all
The
small
the
roads?
Well, yeah, oh yeah, it was all like Route 5 all the way up. I mean, I was young, and we'd get very excited when we got here to the hill, which is dirt roads, and they haven't changed much. They're still, quite mucky, and our hill is very, very steep. We're on top of a mountain. But where I live right now, and where I'm building a house off grid and have been for quite some time, it's a work in progress. Is part of my great 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 grandfather's land when he moved here at around 1800. So we actually were one of the Stoddards, which is my middle name. We're one of the founding families here in
Oh,
Brookfield. They were all farmers for many generations, and I have, it's kind of a Vermont joke, but I'm related to everybody around here. The Trasks and the Alexanders and the McFeetrys and the Taylors and it goes on and on and on because you didn't go far to find your mate. And everybody were farmers, and that community is what I've watched disintegrate since the 70s. We've all watched it. The incursion of the colonizing locust flatlanders, not all of whom are trying to destroy Vermont. Some are trying, obviously, to preserve, embrace, and appreciate that culture. They've been coming for a long time, and it's kind of accelerated in the last 10 or 20 years. And it's more and more that old Vermont is being forgotten. And new racial justice warriors come in and say how racist we were. But, my mother grew up in poverty. All of them grew up in poverty because farming had failed and the government didn't come rescue them. And they were all white because there were very, very few black people here, and not because of racism, because there was no slavery, there was no history.
well, and also a lot
And
of
most of my
the
black friends are
the
me.
migration that took place from the South and from, places like Puerto Rico, like my family, they went to the cities because they were leaving farms actually to go do factory work. They were leaving rural areas to go, in the South to do factory work in the cities. And so it is important to understand history and the history of migrations if we're going to look at the history of migration of Black people from the South into the industrial North. It was to the industrial North, not to the rural North, which is why, like you're saying, that population is very low in New Hampshire and Maine and Vermont because it remained very agricultural and rural. So that's why places like Hartford and New York City and Chicago changed over time from the Great Migration, it was called.
Well, and those cities, particularly Chicago and New York, were big cities. And I grew up in East Hartford, Connecticut, so which Hartford was 80% black and Hispanic. I mean, I grew up in a mixed culture that way. And then I come to white Vermont, and it wasn't because they're white supremacists, because that's just how you, like you say, the movements, but also What we forget is that the white people that I'm talking about that suffered from the advent of corporate agriculture and the domination of a corporate government fascism suffered at the same hands of from the same people as inner city people who were also increasingly corralled into cities. Rural America was being basically taken over and its wealth extracted for the cities, is what Wendell Berry has written about for years. So really, we should all be on the same side.
Okay, go ahead. You were
Oh,
saying,
you're back.
corralled.
You froze.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it was not, I mean, the same forces that corralled migrant groups of people seeking liberty and jobs into the cities were also at that time inflicting their increased stranglehold on rural white Americans. We're all, the same, we all really suffered the same oppression. It is an oppression um, by corporate America allied with government forces that have run out the farmers. In fact, it's an interesting thing you say, dare I say this, but Wendell Berry has written at length about how sharecropping farmers had it better than even white people living in the inner city today, because at least they could grow some okra. At least he's not saying that was a good thing, but he's saying compared to where a lot of us are now, there was more liberty in that. We may not realize that just yet, but increasingly, and why what you're doing is so important, more and more Americans are waking up. You may have seen Wall Street Journal front page article about the effort to take cows away by the globalists, that it's really about controlling our food. Life Site News, which is a large Christian outfit, just did a similar piece. Finally, the mainstream world is starting to say, well, what is this about cows? And frankly, they did a horrible job, both of them, because they didn't properly defend cows, but that's something we can do here
I was
if you
gonna say
wish.
you can
But as you
defend
know, I
them.
well, here's the number one thing. People, if you equip people with the truth, they often it will hold on. So when we're talking about cow methane, which the Wall Street Journal did without questioning two things about cow methane. First of all, we're judging all cows by the methane generated in confinement feed operations, which are unnatural industrial abominations against cows. So why judge equally cows that are raised in an industrial context versus cows that are out on grass, rotationally raised, which many traditional farmers do, we grass-fed farmers do, and many peasant, farming communities around the world that are still providing like 60 to 75% of all our food. That's how they operate. So why are we taking the worst industrial model to malign the animals that have been imprisoned and tortured in them to attack those animals? So once you do that, you also then go, wait a minute, if we were to get rid of the cows and their gas, what would we replace their vitally important manure with? So we can't talk about cow farts without talking about cow plops, and yet they do. And the Wall Street Journal didn't point out that cow plops rebuild soils that are eroding from the application of synthetic fertilizers. Synthetic fertilizers are made from urea, in particular, is made from methane, which is natural gas, which is methane. So you're going from one fart to another. The difference is you've thrown out all the solids, you've created a huge industrial factory with more justification to spray more chemicals on our soil, to deplete the soils more, to weaken the soils more, so we have more water loss, more erosion, and less vital nutrients in our food supplies. Cows are the solution, not the problem. And once you realize that, you have to say, well, why are they using lies to come after cows? They can't come after them fairly, so they have to malign them and lie. And once people know that, and they go, wait a minute, what will we fertilize with? What's this fertilizer? We use fertilizer? You mean even for the soy plants you want to make synthetic meat out of? They're talking about totally eclipsing natural agriculture and implementing an absolutely unsustainable, soil destroying, life destroying system. And they know it. Okay. The WEF knows it. The players at the table of the WEF are Bayer, formerly Monsanto. They are Syngenta, JBS, Tyson Foods, all the big corporations that peddle us these chemicals that are toxifying us, sterilizing us, giving us cancer, obesity, diabetes, heart disease. They want to give us more because of the cows, don't you know? Rant over. Thank you for allowing me to defend my bovine friends.
Well, the reality, John, is that it's not the cows that they're going after necessarily. Only it's the people who are living that lifestyle. That's what I think. I think they're going after people who are raising small scale farms, what would be considered small scale compared to, let's say, corporate. who are feeding their families, who are feeding their community, who are engaging on in this level of the free market where they're being very creative. You know, the food shipping industry is growing, like the direct to customer, that is growing, and that's powerful because not only is it allowing people to live sustainably with their land, it's allowing them to survive kind of outside of that corporate system, which is what I see growing in you know what we're calling the homesteading movement. I see it growing because it's a newer generation that is also, so we're learning from the old timers. We're learning some of the old ways. And we're learning from people like Joel Salatin, and folks like yourself who have been connected generationally to farmers. And there's newer generation folks like myself who've had, you know, who've been disconnected, but who also have that bridge going in the other direction of the creativity and connecting with other folks and learning through social media and online resources. And I was having a conversation with this gentleman who's out in Colorado, who's like me. He's new to this. And he was saying, you know, because I said, I feel like we're going back to the old ways, but in a way, it's the new future. And he says, yeah, this is the true progressive movement, is the movement back onto the land. And he's like, this is the new future. The new future is back onto the land, small scale farming, you know, creating parallel economies, parallel systems where people are, you know, starting their own kitchens and, you know, growing the food that they want to eat and interacting with other people that are doing the same. Um, because the fake health movement of, you know, whether it's, you know, the proselytizing veganism or whatever it is, it's all controlled by corporate entities and it's not healthy.
It's not. And you went there, so I'm going to go there with you now to affirm everything you just said. Well, I'll explain this now. Now my lawyer hat comes on, and I'm going to go a little step further because you've opened the door. As a lawyer, I don't really feel like I have to make a harder argument than necessary to win over a judge, jury, or you and your audience. And therefore, I was defending cows. You've gone a step further and suggested that there might be nefarious purposes, which I hinted at behind cows. But I don't have to prove that to prove that A, methane is by cows is far outweighed by their benefits. And by the way, as Joel points out, cows on grass actually will sequester methane as well as carbon.
Right.
Cows on grass will sequester more carbon dioxide in 10 years, depending on how many, than we've generated in the entire industrial revolution. We know tilling is the problem. That's what's releasing carbon. And conservatives can get behind that because we're not doing it in solar panels and EV cars that totally destroy the planet and generate all kinds of effluent and pollution, air, water, and otherwise, and benefit a few corporations, because that's what's going on. Even if we're warming the planet, those are not the solutions. Cows and regenerative agriculture and moving back to the land is the climate solution. That's what I'm writing about. And yet the left, and Wendell Berry has criticized them, are moving towards the Green New Deal of creating a global government to make us eat what it wants. That's not going to save the planet any more than EV cars or solar panels. But you hit on something else. Let me be frank about this as a lawyer who studied this my whole life. They've been after farmers. You're correct. They are after the people who are not dependent on them because they know that in order to have a totalitarian control of a population, you need to control not only their guns, but their food. If you control their food, by the way, you control the guns because they will starve or yield their guns. And that's why that's a watch the birdie battle. Yes, they're coming after our guns. Yes, I'm pro Second Amendment. But they were going after farmers 100 years ago, 5 decades before you and I were born, before I was born anyway. Let's not age you. They went after the farmers pre-Great Depression. The Great Depression brought all kinds of food controls, and they actually had gunfights with farmers who were giving away milk free to their neighbors rather than comply with federal edicts. You may be
Wow.
familiar with the case of Wickard v. Filburn, in which the United States Supreme Court ruled, I think it was in the 1920s. It might have been a response to wheat controls, I think maybe World War I. So maybe it was a little earlier. But basically determined that the federal government, under the Commerce Clause, could regulate a person raising wheat for their own use on their own farm, and that they had no protection against federal control. That's throwing out the exception swallows the rule. This is the government working for corporations at the time, arguably working for national defense, but the reasons used stayed on the books, and now the federal government basically regulates everything we do. This is why I got involved in this when they came to my farm, you may remember, to try to tell me I couldn't raise unslaughtered beef anymore. That was going to be banned in Vermont by corporate people pushing money up from the federal level down to the state level. And if we had not risen up, it was due to be sunset. It would no longer be legal for me to slaughter and sell you an animal from my own land. And that's been going on in Vermont for hundreds of years. Nobody's got sick by it. Why? Why would the government come after something that's so innocuous? Well, big corporations don't want to share market share with others. We saw in COVID that we don't have enough processing facilities in Vermont. A lot of people wanted to
Right.
get into farming and they go, oh, gee, what am I going to do with these chickens? Oh, well, keep feeding them. Sorry, we're backed up. Well, attacking on-farm slaughter and our processors who are custom processors and our itinerant slaughterers who have been doing this very well multi-generationally is an attack on our ability to live freely. And for those of you who are just getting into it lately, you hit upon something else. You need us old guys. Frankly, the average age of a farmer is 60.
Yep.
I'm 60. So I'm on the young end, and a lot of the younger farmers are trying to learn from the older generation before they're gone. We are trying to preserve some of this land rather than have hedge funds earn money to grow trees to sell, carbon credits to California corporations so they can pollute. Anytime they ever see a profit to be made, they step in. When Vermont moved for organic food labeling, which I was very much part of, the Obama administration, who I had supported, turned around and passed national initiatives deliberately designed to confuse the consumer, negate the benefits of any labeling. And now it's all self-regulated. There's not enough organic food to go around. So what you see in the store labeled organic is often not. What you see in the store labeled grass-fed is often not. It's given a handful of grass. It's 80% of it comes from abroad and is labeled U.S. produce. The only way to really know where your food comes from, support your local neighbor as well as how the animals are treated, is to know your farmer. The closer you are to the farm, the better. And what my book is about is there's a rich world waiting for young people and their children raised on farms with fresh air, fresh water, community. The things that have been destroyed by the attack on small farms can be restored, and they must. And the longer we wait, the more we lose not only biodiversity and heirloom vegetables, but we lose those old folks who are not stupid, who are incredibly rich in diverse multidisciplined knowledge, because to be a farmer, as you are learning, you have to know a lot. So homesteading and growing your own food, this isn't the 70s movement to the land of OPEC driving up prices. This is literally about embracing liberal liberty, self-determination, and controlling your own health and food supply. The antidote to toxic food is healthy food. And more Americans are waking up to phthalates and BPA and things and PFAs that we've been drinking and in our water since the 40s. And we're told, oh, no, Teflon won't hurt you. And now we find out they're called forever chemicals. They never break down in the environment. They never break down in your body. No wonder our children are having issues with so many, including their endocrine disruptors. So they mess with your hormones. Many of these, like atrazine, I believe atrazine is one,
Yep.
mimics estrogen. That's not good for boys. Whatever it
It's not
does,
good for girls either.
it's not
Like
good
too
for
much.
girls.
Yeah.
Girls are
Yeah.
actually more vulnerable. Girls are much more
Yeah.
vulnerable. Their reproductive systems are much more vulnerable.
Yeah.
But maybe we need to think about men too. Their sperm counts are dropping. If you
Sure.
want to make a population disappear without ovens, then you just make them sterile. And obesity, diabetes, heart disease, all these things are sickening us. And as you say, they control the cures too, and they profit on it, whether it's mRNA vaccines or obesity drugs. Now, instead of exercising and eat healthy food, we'll trim your stomach or we'll give you a pill. Look, we found some hormones and some surgeries to help you if you're feeling a little endocrine disrupted when you're 14. We can make 150 grand on you and get a lifetime of drug dependence. If anybody thinks that the food companies in this country are any more trustworthy or have any more integrity than R.J. Reynolds and the tobacco companies who lied about their nicotine, then you're not awake. And that's true wokeness, is waking up to the tightening of the noose around our food supply. This is something that should unite people no matter what their
Right.
political or individual or tribal identity. That's what we're about, you and I.
Thank you for listening to the Latina Libertarian, proud to partner with the Independence Inn in Strafford, New Hampshire, a Free Stater owned and operated inn and home of the Heartwood Restaurant. Use coupon code LATINA10 for 10% discount for stays up to 4 days, or LATINA40 for a 40% discount on stays of 5 or more days. Explore the libertarian homeland from the seacoast to the White Mountains. Go to Free State events and meet the porcupines who live and love New Hampshire. To use this exclusive offer for my listeners and followers, go to www.theindependenceinn.com or call 781 413 6014 and book your stay. Let them know the Latina Libertarian sent you. Remember, coupon code LATINA10 for 1 to 4 days or LATINA40 for 5 or more days. Come and see all that the Free State has to offer. Now back to the show. And
Your movement, the homesteading thing is something I'm moving more and more. I've been doing it for years.
yeah,
Here's my message that I said 25 years ago. My kids were sick of hearing it. Now they realize I'm right. We're all moving off grid, Olga. Some of us are going to move off grid deliberately, step by step, and some of us one day are going to find out our grid just was not maintained or
right.
doesn't serve anymore. And gee, good thing you got a heat pump. Stick some wood in there and fire that baby up. Vermonters used to be one of the most independent, self-sufficient. Really, we were subsistence farmers for 150 years. It isn't really all rich and Taj Mahals around here. That's why you still see that heritage, but they're pretty quick to turn it into a gentrified Martha's Vineyard playground for tourists. And if the economy goes tank, because historically economies can go up and down, then the
Yep.
first thing to go is tourism. And they're not going to come pay you $50 for your little wedge of cheese anymore. You're going to need to be able to milk a cow. And I feel horrible for people who live in a place like New York City or other places where all of their food comes out from us farmers, just with all those dumb farmers will keep sending us food. Well, it just will stop. And COVID showed us a glimpse of that. And that's why so many people are fleeing New York and California and trying to get in a place where there's more stability, because they realize their vulnerability. It was absolute chaos in those big cities. And that's, I think, a harbinger of the future. So a lot of people are moving to the country. That's why prices are driving up. Now, what do you young people do? What do people do raising kids? We need solutions to these problems, but we need more and more people to at least be pushing in this direction. Forgive me for going on so long, but you actually hit a few different issues. And I wanted to point out, yes, they are after farmers. They've always been after farmers. Monsanto has identified farmers as the biggest threat to their profit line, their profit margins. At one point, about 20 years ago, they said, we've managed to trim farmers down to 8% of our overheads. They would like to trim us down to 0. They would like to use robot machines and robot processors and robot distribution systems to robotically funnel toxic foods into us. Wendell Berry wrote an essay 30 years ago. He said, if corporations could design a system to run their food in a tube right to your navel, they would have done so. They don't care about our health, and they've proved it over and over. So what you're doing is so important, and your listeners need to get on board and realize, it's intimidating for people living in cities. You've mentioned it. You're trying to learn from the old people. We don't have a choice not to. If you don't know how to breathe, you'd better learn from the old people before nobody knows how to breathe anymore. It's that paramount. And I'm excited to see that after 20 years of railing in the wilderness, from on my part, that the people are listening, and you're listening, and they're listening to you crazy libertarians.
I know. And one of the things I say, like, even like how I got started is pick one thing and just try growing it. Like, it can be very intimidating and overwhelming. And there is a sense of urgency to a certain degree, but you have to start somewhere. I think just changing your mindset of, because one of the questions I always like, what's a homesteader? And well, it's a broad definition, but at the base, no matter what your definition is, homesteading requires a level of self sufficiency. So it requires learning some skills, whatever that looks like. For some people, it may look like going all out and being off grid and raising as much of their own food. For some people, it could be, learning to grow some herbs, a vegetable, getting some chickens or something like that. But you have to start somewhere. And I think the very beginning is the mindset. What are some resources that you would recommend for people who are on this journey? who need some practical skills, what are some things you have found to be helpful that they can look up?
Oh, you mean my book? Book plug, book plug.
Plug it away.
Well, I think you know I'm going to plug Joel Salatin. He has a number of books helping people, and also he has a great book on the other end, on the consumer end, Beyond Labels, that he wrote with Dr. Sina
That's right.
McCullough, which is an invaluable resource to help you navigate the food labels and what they mean. And that
Yeah.
alone can be very intimidating. So there's a parallel there, that it can be so intimidating that people give up. I've been so frustrated. You think you're eating the right thing, and then you find, oh gosh, it's got that in it. It's not good.
Right.
Oh, it's got that in the packaging. Oh gosh, this is, well, it's work, because it's an adversarial system in which you are the victim. And if you make the wrong decisions, you and your children will have a lot more forever chemicals in you. I mean, that's just the truth. So we've got, people out there saying, oh, glyphosate's fine. Glyphosate's fine. No, it isn't. It's probably destroying our microbiome. It's GMO crops, whether or not they are, individually harmful in their own right, the chemicals used to produce them are. And we're seeing that. We're probably killing the bees. So we don't. So those are some books. But let me come back to a little thing, a theme that's within what you asked. And I want to encourage people, because if you're in the city or you're in the suburbs, you may feel totally helpless, kind of like within the grocery store. Why try? And you hit on it. And I want to share my story briefly, because you may know it. I didn't choose to get into farming. I lived in the UK for several years. I've lived all over the country. I was an international corporate tax attorney in a 16th floor complex in Hartford, Connecticut for 3 years. Okay, I was starch shirts and commuting to work and working 80 hours a week. I didn't grow anything, but I got sick with Lyme disease, and it crippled me. And so I said to my wife at the time, and I didn't want our kids to get Lyme disease because we were pulling ticks out of them everywhere in Connecticut. I said, well, I can't walk. I've lost everything. I didn't even know
Mm.
at the time it was Lyme, but I was really, really sick. I said, I want to live where my heart is. I've spent my whole life living where the money is. So we bought a farm in Barton. I'm sharing this story because, if I can do this
Yeah.
sick as a lawyer with no background, so can you. And I also want to point out, I'm not some hero where I said, oh, look, I'm going to escape corporate American industrialism. I'm going to go on what's the guy, the into the wild, because I did that too when I was like 19. I lived in Yellowstone. I hitchhiked in the woods. No, I was in my 30s with kids, and I was sick. That was it, Olga. But now, after doing it for a year or two, in our story, one day my wife Jackie and I are sitting there, and we got our three kids, and everything on the table we grew. We didn't really set out, but we had the chicken, the milk, the butter. We were milking cows, all the vegetables. And Jackie said, "You realize, we grew all of this." And there were a couple of realizations. The biggest one was it was tastier and healthier than anything we'd ever had, and we were giving it to our children. There was a sense of satisfaction there, and it's priceless. I don't know how to put a price on it. But what we also were learning was that there were forces, regulatory and market forces, that were making it harder for us to do this than to buy it at the store. There were subsidies for large corporations to grow corn and make high fructose corn syrup. There were subsidies for wheat and glyphosate to be sprayed on it as a desiccant just before harvest, all driven by profit, all driven by control. So the two educations happen at once. Now, one of the things I emphasize in my book is that you have to do what you can where you are. Not everybody can flee the city and go buy 100 acres in the woods. We bought
Right.
140 acres with 11,000 square feet of barns and a house for $115,000 asking price. That's a $1.4 million farm now, which,
Yeah.
by the way, may not be so much the increase in the value of the farm. It's just a decrease in the value of the dollar.
Of the
It's another
dollar.
thing going on. Food is going to get more and more expensive, whether deliberately or not. They're lying about it. Diesel fuel, all fuels, all fertilizers are going up double, triple in the last 2 years. Those are going to compound and filter through the food supply. The prices in the grocery store aren't going down. 30 years ago, people gave up growing gardens because it wasn't worth it anymore. There are bugs, it's toil, it's hard work, and you can get it cheaper in the store or down at the stand. Not anymore. And if you're just going to raise a few vegetables for your neighbors, I'm talking to a woman right now. In 1 year, she's got like 360 members in a CSA she set up selling beef. There's a demand, and we need to grow the supply. and we're doing it, but we need to do it on a small local scale. So if you start a garden, we had victory gardens as a nation in World War II. Nobody's calling on you now in this administration or any political party to have a victory garden. You want to fight Monsanto, have a victory garden. If you're a suburbanite, you can start a garden. You can
Right.
do all kinds of gardens. You can do aquaculture indoors. You could grow some herbs in pots like my wife does all around. You could just be picking rosemary and thyme and what does she do? Chives, and make stuff. And once you do, you're going to kind of get a bug. You go, wait a minute, my whole life I got this in a brand name package that's the same all over the world. We were in Puerto Rico. I was amazed to see Driscoll's blueberries exactly like on the shelves in Vermont. The ability
Wow.
to produce those at scale, go investigate how your food is grown. You want to care about animals, go look at how those animals are treated that you're buying in the store. And so the other thing is, most people don't jump in like we did, and we didn't. Actually, we started raising just gardens and vegetables, then we got into pigs. Pretty soon I got addicted to cows. But we were going to make cheese, not milk cows. My family, dairy milking is a problem. Well, dairy add-ons like cheese, Vermont still isn't meeting the demand for all the cheeses it could produce and export. We can't, it doesn't get halfway out of the state. It's all eaten. And I'm not talking about Cabot here. I'm talking about, even Vermont butter and cheese, I think, sells most of their product. So there's a niche here. It's value added. Vermont has farmland. It can be growing food and selling it to Boston just like it did 200 years ago, instead of converting it all to second and third homes for the Obama Bush clans, the elites, whatever party they are. So, and come in, the water's fine. A lot of people, it's hard work. Yes, you'll enjoy that. Things die, plants die, bugs eat them. Blight comes in. It's humbling. And the more you learn about your food that way, the more you will realize the challenge, and the more you will realize your vulnerability and how much you don't know. And then you get into pickling or canning or
Right.
cheese making. We built a cheese facility. This lawyer, while sick, built a soup to nuts cow and goat milking facility, complying with Vermont's pasteurized milk ordinance, very complex book of stuff, to make raw milk cheeses, artisanal cheeses. And the state helped me do it. So, you don't have to do that. I'm just saying, if I can do that, and I'm still learning, all the time. And we have about 50 sheep right now. We're breeding lambs right now, or breeding sheep for spring. We have about
Wow.
12 cows. We're constantly having problems, and that's farming. And you work every day of the week. Forget that weekend thing. Once you have animals, but most people start with chickens, and then they might start with pigs. Then they might get brave and start trying to get breed chickens, or hatch eggs, or have a sow with a litter, or raise a
That's
cow.
what I'm looking to do
Yeah. So anyway,
this
so
spring
hopefully I'm
is,
speaking to you. You grow
yeah.
into it, and the more you grow, the more courage, the more knowledge, and Joel says it takes about, I think it's Joel, about 5 years for the average person to really learn the ropes. It's not like jumping in a factory. You go, okay, here, I'll put this widget in this package, and here I am. And 4 hours later, I'm qualified. It's a humbling adversity, and it's so worth it. And we raised our children this way, and we had no idea that we were tormenting them for life, that it was a good torment, that they would thank us for it, that it built the skills of the initiative, the gratitude, the humility, the appreciation, and the knowledge that they are now very functionally using as adults. And we're very, very, very grateful, because we didn't even do it deliberately. We don't even take credit for it. But I assure you, and by the way, everybody knows this about raising their kids. It would be good for them on the farm, but they don't want to do it. Well, it would be great for my kids, but then I have to work on weekends, and I have to go out in the snow and get the frozen chicken water, and then things die, and I don't like that. Don't deprive your children of the gift of the adversity of
Right.
the farming life.
Yeah, they're not running out, they're volunteering for certain chores.
Make them.
But it builds character, and it connects them to, to where their food comes from. It really creates, a level of appreciation. We've been processing meat birds raising and processing our own meat birds for the past 2 years. And, my oldest is not a fan. But when it comes to, to butchering day, he's out there contributing in the way that he's able to. Like, he's not into actually butchering them, but he will bring me the birds. He will, help me out in other ways. And that's fine. Same thing with my husband. My husband does not like killing the birds, but he will build their structures. He will make sure they're fed and watered. And then, on that day, like he'll help in other ways. And that's fine. Some things are not for everyone, but there's so many tasks. And at the end of the day, today, when my son goes out to take a chicken out from the freezer, he's like, wow, this is the tastiest chicken I've ever had. And even
Yes.
though he didn't like part of the process and he complained the whole time, he understands that, it's worth it because we have a freezer full of meat that we produced ourselves, and that has a level of value that goes beyond nutrition.
Well, you hit on something else that I feel I have certain insights that I want to share with your listeners because, frankly, my problem sometimes is a lot of these things we take for granted. We don't
Yeah,
even know how to communicate them to other people because we figure other people gets it too. You mentioned that, killing animals is not for everyone. Actually, it's not for anyone. I've never met anybody who likes killing chickens or any other animals. If so, that's a precursor to being a serial killer, right?
yeah,
Nobody likes it. Your husband doesn't like it. I don't like it. In fact, my wife will tell you that the longer I've done it, the less I like it. An on-farm slaughterer came here a couple of years ago, who's been doing this since his father and his grandfather did it, on visiting people on farms to do the specialty work that he does. And I said to him, I said, Mark, I don't know, maybe I'm not much of a farmer. The more I kill animals, the less I like it. And he says, me too. I hate killing the animals. I have to kill the animals in order to give them a good, humane life. They are
right.
slaughtered on the land on which they are raised. Death
Yeah,
and blood are part of my steak on my plate. The real shocker is that so many people think they can hide from that reality. They buy it all, plastic wrapped with more chemicals in the store, with the blood removed, the slaughter removed, the death removed, and somehow their consciences are clear. Maybe if we had more conscience and more direct involvement in the animals that die so that we can live, maybe we wouldn't throw away 40 to 50% of our food. Maybe we
right,
wouldn't order more food than we need. Maybe because the meat was on sale, whether fish, fowl, or beef, we wouldn't leave it to rot in the refrigerator if we had more of a sense, more of a direct connection with the life that led to that meat product. It's not a commodity. And it's a symbiotic relationship. And this is why, too, we have people here in Vermont demanding that, we shouldn't buy dairy products because boy cows are killed, was a recent article. Boy cows, girl cows, what do you think? We can't raise all the bulls as pets. You know what it costs to feed a cow? This is the cost of farming and agriculture that's been a symbiotic relationship for humans since we came out of the hunting gathering mode. And you're not going to all eat synthetic Ben and Jerry's ice cream without picking up a lot of chemicals and helping, Unilever, an international corporation. Are you out of your minds? It is only because this society is so divorced from killing its own animals, from living close to the earth, that it can even contemplate these fantastical notions that make corporate boardrooms laugh. And one day in the future, we're going to look back and say this is the most pompous, out of touch, ridiculously absurd society in the history of humanity. And when 30% of high school graduates don't know how to boil an egg, you can look it up. It was an actual survey. Then we have to ask if our kids know how to boil an egg. So when you talked about our kids look at the other kids, your kids will look at the other kids 10 years from now like they're from another planet because they are. You're bringing your children back to earth, back to the ground, back to the soil, which we know more and more is directly linked to our physical health, not just the microbiome of my stomach, but the microbiome of that soil, which is mostly writhing, teeming with trillions of microorganisms that we're only just beginning to understand. And more science is showing that if you live in an urban concrete jungle, you're not actually in connection through your animals and your food with that broader microbiome, that literally we are biologically tied to the earth. Look at the Amish and the health studies about the Amish. It's shown this for 50 years. And here we are insulating ourselves with more sterilizing chemicals into cubicles and losing our human connections as well as our community connections, as well as our connections to healthy food and healthy animals. And I'm not enslaving my animals. I'm the one that already got up this morning and went and moved 60 bales and have to go get 60 more today and then a round bale. They're calling to me and they need water and they need feed, and it's my duty to provide it to them, and it's my joy. If you watch some of my
right.
videos, there's nothing more satisfying than watch your fat cows burnt methane on grass you just fed them, supporting a local farmer. Anyway, rant over. I hope that's helpful.
No, it really, you may think, oh, I'm gonna get a couple of chickens, because we get eggs. And then you realize there's a relationship that takes place, right? Because you're taking on the responsibility of an animal, and you have to make sure it's housed, you have to protect it from predators. There's just so much that goes on that connects you. I do the slaughtering here for our animals, and I'm so blessed that, there's people in my life who've done this, who were raised this way, who came and taught me how to do it, and they taught me how to do it with so much reverence, and to acknowledge the animal and to thank them
Hmm.
before that last moment, and to do it and to thank God, and to do it swiftly out of respect, and then to process it, fully conscious. And I always say I am owning the karma of the food that we're putting on our plates by taking on this responsibility. And so now, like, anytime we go out, go to the supermarket and I look at what they're selling, in terms of meat, or going out to a restaurant, it is such a different, thought process. It's like, I'll have like I'll have vegetables, or I'll have something different, because I can eat just much better quality meat at home that I've either raised myself or my neighbor raised. So it's even just different, because I'd rather have, meat from the animal that I raise, and had that relationship with, and put so much more effort, because it's beyond the nutritional value, like I was saying. And I think you don't learn that until you really start doing it. And I'm just excited that so many people of, my Generation X and millennials, are actually getting into this and realizing it. I think the power of social media is that we're sharing our stories, and we're growing. And I know I'm being inspired by all types of people, around me and around the country, who are doing this. And we're looking, towards people like yourself, Salatin, and others who've been doing this, and I think who've been reaching out their hand for years, waiting for us to kind of clasp onto it, to continue, this process, because it's so important. And I do honestly believe that the greatest contribution to bringing more liberty for people is a lot of what we're doing on the grassroots level, in terms of actual lifestyles that are self-sufficient, regardless of your political view. What you live and practice on the ground, I think, is going to have way more impact in the long run. I think a lot of people from different angles, whether it's, education, healthcare, pharmaceutical industry, whatever it is, whatever level of corporate, um, infestation that we see in our lives, a lot of people are waking up and realizing that they have to scale back and figure out the best way forward. And I think the, food independence, because we have to eat. And I think we've been aware for decades of, we want to be healthier. And like what you were saying in terms of the labels, we're realizing that a lot of these labels are legal terms. They don't mean what we think they mean. There's a lot of marketing. And we're looking, 30 years later, 40 years later, and we're looking at the health, generally, of our population, which is just going way, way down. We've gotten unhealthier, since the green revolution of the 70s, with, right, the corporate takeover of farming, um, than we've ever been. So I think what, we're doing on this small scale level is necessary. And I think slowly it's growing.
Well, again, you've hit on some important themes there, and I'll cut me off if I get ranting. But as to the death of the animals, I think it's really important to people for people to understand that the opposite is the case. It's not unethical for us to kill our own animals. We don't like it. How do you do that? I couldn't do that. Well, you're still killing them. You're doing it indirectly. You're hiring hitmen that actually
Right.
make gulags and Hitler's ovens look kind compared to how some animals are treated. And some people are aware
Yeah.
of that. So their solution is, well, let's get rid of all animals and eat bugs or or plants. It won't solve the problems at all. It'll actually compound the problems. So, a chapter of my book that I ended up removing, and it may make its own book, was called A Christian Ethic. And it talked about the religious traditions of slaughtering animals with reverence, particularly in Judaism and Islam, and that Christians, we don't really have a counterpart. And if we're to have a counterpart, it's that I pray on the animals before I kill them. I don't have a ritualistic demand from a specific denomination. I'm non-denominational Christian. But if I don't have reverence for what God has provided, what you refer to as the karma of it, I meet people now who are slaughterers, on-farm slaughterers, because I know a lot of them who have told me they've been attacked. As one woman, a really wonderful local woman named Mary Lake, told me, people said, well, I guess if you need therapy, that's how you can get it out, killing animals. She's like, I do this with reverence. I couldn't do this if I didn't know that I was treating the animal humanely. The animals do not suffer. If you do it properly, um,
Right.
you know, while they're eating, they never know what hit them. And there's a whole litany of knowledge here that's lost to buy it off the shelf at Costco generation that thinks it's horrifying. Well, you better look in the mirror, because what you're doing is infinitely more horrifying. So I do think we need an animal ethic, and the animal ethic would immediately, a broader animal ethic would immediately call into question the vertical and horizontal integration of our beef processing industry, our pork industry, where 100,000 pigs are in one facility, and if the power goes out, they'll all be dead in 3 hours because they'll choke on their own fumes. That's not
Oh,
natural. That's what you're supporting when you buy Smithfield or Hormel pork and sneer at Olga and John for raising a pig. By the way, I don't do pigs anymore. I get really attached to my pigs. I love sows. I find them fascinating animals. They're a lot harder to rear, and to fence, everything else. That's why I've done it. They're a real challenge. But there's something else here. Let's just say that the power went out in America, that there was an EMP or a currency collapse or a grid failure of any sustained period, and then the social chaos that would ensue that we've seen just hints of. 100 million people could die. People smarter than I have written about this. Our food supplies, when you start raising your own food, as you are with your chickens, and then you look at it in the store, you see a lot of things, don't you, that you only see comparatively. We learn by comparison. So now you've raised your own chicken. You go to the store, you go to a restaurant, you're like, gee, I know that chicken didn't come here. We're eating like 20 million chickens a day. And they only do that through some really horrific things that they impose on the farmers. They're not farmers anymore. They're factory workers, and they're being destroyed and their numbers cut down. The small farms, there's a bigger demand more and more. Remember, prices are going to go up. And my book argues for reducing or eliminating, phasing out actually the huge subsidies of monocultures, because those foods are artificially cheap. We've made high fructose corn syrup and sugar products artificially cheap. We subsidize them. Now we want to put a sugar tax on the overweight, obese, addicted, diabetic people who are eating it. That's a perfect example of government failing us. But
yeah.
the Green New Deal and AOC and Klaus Schwab want to up it all the way up. The solution is local. The solution is small, whether it's to provide food or to cure the environment. Food grown locally doesn't use as many fossil fuels. It isn't shipped as far. We do grass fed because we avoid grain. We're not putting extra phosphorus and other toxins into the ground here in Vermont through grain, as we've done with cows.
There's
But
greater diversity, greater
every,
nutrition.
well, that's part of it too. When we go to
Yeah.
monocultures with animals, when you have a lot of different animals, they actually balance out their pathogens.
Right.
The soil's richer. That's Joel's.
A
Their whole
whole
book
other
about.
thing.
But from a basic foundation, if you're in the city and this all intimidates you, be aware one day's coming where the ship's going to sink and you don't want to be on it. And that might be a horrible thing, but we've got ourselves here with the Green Revolution and the illusion that food is cheap and plentiful and will always be available. Part of my journey started at 16 working in a grocery store when I learned stocking shelves 8 hours at a time, that 3 days they'd be empty. We saw it in COVID. And I'm not talking toilet paper here. And
Yeah.
now we've got, with an increasing globalization, we actually have more and cheaper food, berries from Chile, picked weeks ago maybe, and it looks
Right.
so good and plentiful, and avocados flooding us from Mexico. But each step makes it more vulnerable to pathogens, disease, supply disruption, and tyranny and currency failure. So everything that's making food cheaper and cheaper will one day make it absolutely disappear. And if you had to live tomorrow on what you have collected today, you might have a look at what your future portends for you. My grandmothers both, one lived to 97, the other 100. They still had weeks and weeks worth of canned food on hand. You couldn't tell them, oh no, just trust Peter Pan. Just trust Kraft macaroni and cheese. You're always, no, they lived it. They saw it. They lost their savings in the bank, and they know
Right.
that they cannot trust a system that is rigged against them and farmers. That is the peril. Vermonters, of all people, Vermonters
Yeah.
are rushing to sell out their heritage to the highest bidder from New York City or California. And we pigs know not to crap where they sleep. We Vermonters ought to stop crapping on ourselves. We are backing up. We're destroying the most vital asset we have, which is the farmland and the farm knowledge. Both are heritages that we have disdained and that the newcomers moving here derogatorily sneer at for decades. It's time to reclaim it, and with pride and humility. That's the other thing. You don't become a farmer unless you're humble. You mentioned people helping you. People helped me learn how to make hay because I came to them. I said, look, I'm a lawyer. I don't know what I'm doing. Please help me. So they helped me. Humility is part of the game. There aren't too
Yeah.
many cocky farmers out there because farming will kick you pretty quickly in the seat of your pants if you think you've got a handle on it. Whether pathogens or markets or just a cow getting stuck in a fence or a piece of wire around a leg, it's a world of trauma of sorts. And
Hmm.
that's why it's so joyful when it goes well. We talk about this all the time. We just had a cow have a calf. And last year we spent 3 hours torturously getting an oversized calf out of her, and she almost died.
Mm.
It's a trauma. It was her first calf. Her eyes are rolling back in her head. I thought she was going to die. And to see, she had her calf and she came and told us. She bellowed and bellowed till we came out. I swear this cow was showing us in joy and pride, her milk coming out, her calves on her. That's priceless. And that's what I try to share with my YouTube. And I wish more people, I say it again, jump in, the water's fine. Do it on the level you can. You will get addicted. And this raises another issue. I was talking to somebody recently. A young person says, John, it's just a fad. The young people want to do it till they figure out it's hard work and adversity, and they don't have weekends off, and then they'll quit. Well, there is a certain element. But I'm like, really? You think it's a fad? That's a good sign. For some, it's sticking. For some, they get
Right.
it. For some, they're finding the purposes, I think you are, that you didn't realize you were lacking. And you're doing a good
Right.
thing for your children, Olga.
Thank you. And thanks for all you're doing. I will make sure that I share your book so people can see it. If people want to get in touch with you or follow you, where can they do that?
Over. Come on. I'm always here. So I'm
Awesome.
joking. It's farmerjohnklar at gmail.com, JOHNKLAR. My Substack is Small Farm Republic. And I have a website with some author details at Small Farm Republic. And those then link to some of my other writing. I've written for Mother Earth News. I'm speaking with Joel here in Vermont in next week. This is exciting. Vermont actually has a voice to lead the country on these issues. It's not all Bill McKibben. It's not all solar panels in Vermont.
Right.
There are farmers here still, and we should respect them and ask them to share their knowledge with us. So thank you for letting me on. I'm sorry if I haven't gone. You can tell I'm a little passionate about this subject, but I'm sorry if
I
I've.
love it. I'm so glad we got this chance to have this conversation. I've been wanting to speak with you for a while now. Thank you, everyone who's been watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Latina Homesteader. Give John a follow. I'm one of his subscribers. I enjoy his articles pretty much almost on a not quite on a daily basis. Between you and Joel Salatin, I always have something to read in the morning. So thanks again for joining me, and take care, everyone.
Thanks so much.